Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time, we're talking about how the remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for Nintendo Switch 2 could solve some of Ocarina of Time's greatest mysteries. This game came out back in 1998, and for so many people, myself included, it's one of the greatest games ever made. And we've gone back to this game so many different times and have wondered about so many different details. There are so many mysteries about this game that fans have been trying to figure out for so many years. With this remake that's coming out, we understand that it's going to be a very ambitious one. We've seen Nintendo describe this as a full remake, or a rebirth. And from what we've seen of the teaser trailer, clearly there are some reimagined elements here. This is looking to be perhaps Nintendo's most ambitious remake of all time. Some people are wondering if it's going to be more of a reimagining. We shall see. Point is though, with this level of effort, with this level of redesign and new details, there's a strong possibility we're going to get better answers, better clues to help us solve some of the greatest mysteries of Ocarina of Time. So what are some of those mysteries, and what might we learn about them in this remake? That's what we're getting into today. Now before diving into it all, I'll point out I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, and we're getting really close. Hopefully we're going to hit that goal soon, so if you find yourself enjoying my videos, I would very much appreciate your support via your subscription. So perhaps one of the most talked about mysteries from Ocarina of Time is what happens near the end of the game, where supposedly a three-way timeline split is created. We understand that in the timeline for The Legend of Zelda, it all starts as one timeline with Skyward Sword, and then eventually, once we get to Ocarina of Time at the end of the game, it is split into three. There's the child timeline, there's the adult timeline, and then there's the fallen hero timeline. When you play through the game and you see what happens, it's easy to understand why there's at least two timelines created here. The one where you're a child and the one where you're an adult, because you do travel back and forth between these two different times. But there's a third timeline that was supposedly created, and that's not really explained in any way within the actual game. So with this remake, could they give us something there that will help us to understand how this third timeline is actually created? It's at least something that a lot of us are hoping for. Some people are hoping that what they do is create an alternate ending, depending on how you play the game, and that might be one really good way to go about doing it. Perhaps if you actually die in your fight against Ganon at the end, instead of the game just giving you an opportunity to start all over, you actually see a cutscene that shows what happens in the Fallen Hero timeline, and then they give you an opportunity to start again. We've seen some games do this, for example the recent Resident Evil Requiem, where there's more than one potential ending. If you choose the bad ending, you will see what happens, it'll be a pretty lengthy cutscene, and then you have an opportunity to go back to your prior save, or checkpoint, and attempt to go for the good ending. They could do something like this with the Ocarina of Time remake at the end. But this is just one of several mysteries from Ocarina of Time. One that I've personally wondered about quite a bit is whatever happened to Lord Jabu-Jabu. Lord Jabu-Jabu is this giant fish, and he's so giant he's even his own dungeon. You get to explore him as a child. But when you come back as an adult, he's nowhere to be found. But what's interesting about this is that you might just be able to imagine that he swam off somewhere, or maybe he died. But the problem is, there's no evidence of this. In this environment, there's no way to escape. There's no actual channel where we can imagine Lord Jabu-Jabu would swim away. So at the very least, what they could do is redesign the environment in a way where we can at least envision Lord Jabu-Jabu opting to swim away. Or perhaps if he did die, show some evidence of that, perhaps a skeleton, or maybe some sort of text somewhere, some character mentioning what happened to Lord Jabu-Jabu. There's a lot of potential here, and at the very least I think with modern visuals we'll at least see the environment where it'll be easier for us to imagine what actually happened. On the note of characters dying though, let's talk about what happens to Navi at the very end of Ocarina of Time. Now, we don't quite know for sure with 100% certainty what happens to Navi. All we know is that she flies high up towards the tippity top of the Temple of Time, and the game ends. But you see, in Majora's Mask, the sequel, Link is out in the woods searching for a lost friend, a long-lost friend. We know it's not Princess Zelda, and we know that Navi is the one that flew away. But the thing is, fairies are supposed to stick with a Kokiri in the Lost Woods. Link is not a Kokiri, and we know that he leaves the Lost Woods and isn't hanging around there the entire time. And in Majora's Mask, he's looking for someone, but this game, it's been theorized, and it's pretty obvious, I would say, that there's a lot of motifs about the 5 stages of grief. So many people imagine that perhaps Navi died, and Majora's Mask in some ways an expression of him going through the 5 stages of grief. Now this is a theory, it's not confirmed, but perhaps with the Ocarina of Time remake, we'll have a better picture of what actually happens to Navi at the very end. Does she just fly up to the top of the Temple of Time and disappear? Do we see her fly out a window? Does she come back down? That's left up for debate at the end, but with this retelling, might it be shown a bit differently? Perhaps. Now something else that we don't see is the King of Hyrule in Ocarina of Time. When we visit Princess Zelda for the first time, we're in her garden and we get to look at like this hall through a window where there's Ganondorf and some soldiers, and he's bowing down to who we presume is the king, but there's no actual depiction of him. He's referenced, but we don't actually see him. In the remake, where we know much of which is going to be redesigned and we're probably going to see a lot of things from different angles, could we finally see the king be depicted? Perhaps he could even have a larger role than just being entirely off-screen. In the teaser, we see that there's some narration, there's actual voice acting here, and with modern 3D Zelda, voice acting has already become a norm. Perhaps we could see some voice acting here, even with the king, and there's a little bit more story being told. We look at a recent remake for Star Fox, and there's a lot of new story being told there, with a lot of characters saying a lot more about the world. Maybe they could be doing something similar with this Ocarina of Time remake, and we'll hear some words from the king. But on the note of the King of Hyrule, let's talk about Rauru, named after the first King of Hyrule, which actually is really interesting to think about here because Tears of the Kingdom, a game that came out many years after Ocarina of Time, does things that has implications about Ocarina of Time, one of the biggest ones being that the first King of Hyrule is named Rauru. And so Rauru, the Sage of Light in Ocarina of Time, would then be named after the first king. Could there be some mention of that in the remake? I hope so. But the mystery here surrounding Rauru has more so to do with his connection with the owl, Kaepora Gaebora. Now it's clearly hinted at that there might be a connection between the two, and many years later in Hyrule Historia it is said that the owl is a form of Rauru so he can leave the Chamber of Sages and guide Link throughout the world of Hyrule, but many people don't consider Hyrule Historia to be fully canon, so it'll be interesting to see if we can get some confirmation or more of a clear hint that there is a connection between the owl and Rauru. Something else that can be expanded upon with the remake here to give us a bit more clarity as to what is going on is the Sacred Realm. The Sacred Realm is this location where the Triforce can be found. This realm Ganondorf gains entry to, which gives him the ability to take over Hyrule while Link is in this 7-year slumber. But we don't really see much. We just see a white void and the Chamber of Sages. Rauru explains to us that the Chamber of Sages is actually within the Temple of Light, which is within the center of the Sacred Realm. But all we see is this blue room, which is just a chamber within the Temple of Light, which we do not see depicted in any way. So could we finally see the Temple of Light, perhaps an actual dungeon in this remake? Perhaps. And could we see a better depiction of the actual Sacred Realm and not just have us see this white void? We've seen the Sacred Realm depicted with more detail in other Zelda games, so now with this remake, with a whole bunch of redesigns occurring, it seems pretty likely that they may show us more than just a white void this time. Another mystery in Ocarina of Time that I find quite curious is the tree in Lake Hylia. There's this giant slash on there, but we don't understand where this would have come from. It feels so random. There's nothing in the game that offers any clear explanation. A personal theory I have is that at one point they were planning to have an ice temple. And we know in the ice cavern there is the White Wolfos. Perhaps at one point the White Wolfos was planned to be a more significant boss fight where there may have been a little bit more story told. And where the water temple is where the ice temple would have been, which is where we see the tree. So if there was an ice temple there with a giant ice wolf as a boss fight, it might have made a lot more sense. But since they changed those things and the ice temple was scrapped, it doesn't make much sense. But perhaps in the remake, they could recontextualize what is going on with that tree or change some things around so things make a bit more sense. And on the note of cut content, there's a whole bunch of things we've heard about that could be in Ocarina of Time, but one that has sort of stood as one of Ocarina of Time's greatest mysteries is the location of the Unicorn Fountain. Now, from what we understand, the Unicorn Fountain isn't actually in the game, but we've seen from some early footage of the game this environment, so it was likely also cut, but people for so many years have been seeking it out, trying to find it, thinking it might have something to do with this cut Triforce quest or something like that. maybe in the remake they could revisit this idea and we can actually find, finally, this long-lost unicorn fountain. The location of the unicorn fountain, though, isn't the only location fans have wondered about over these many years. Many fans, myself included, have wondered about the whereabouts of Princess Zelda after you acquire all 3 spiritual stones and we see her ride off the Sheik when being chased by Ganondorf. Where do they go? There's nowhere in the map, nowhere in the world, as a child, where you can find them. It's a mystery. So could this mystery be addressed in any way, shape, or form in the remake? There's a lot of speculation that they're going to be expanding on this game in many ways, perhaps even the overworld itself, maybe even adding some new locations. If this does indeed happen, maybe we'll see something that gives us an idea of where Princess Zelda went. At the very least, if they're going to be expanding upon the story, there could be some suggestion as to where she was over these many years. Which then brings me to another consideration: Sheik. Many fans wonder if we could perhaps see more about Sheik, or even get to play as Sheik in this new version of Ocarina of Time, or at least see some of the in-betweens, what Sheik is up to when Sheik is not hanging out with Link before he enters a new dungeon. There's potential here for us to learn a little bit more about what Sheik has been doing. But another grand opportunity that the Ocarina of Time remake has here is expanding upon the Hyrulean Civil War. And by doing so, we could learn some really important details, such as a little bit more about Link's lineage. We know about his mother, we know she passes away, but we don't know exactly what happens. What about his father? What events transpired that had Link's mother escape to the forest and leave Link with the Deku Tree? A retelling with more details of what led to this event could certainly give us more insight here. And if they go a bit further, we can learn a little bit more about what was going on beyond just Link's parents, but just the different tribes involved. For example, the Sheikah, we know they work closely with the royal family, and there are certainly some potential implications with the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple, but there aren't many Sheikah to actually be found in Ocarina of Time. Perhaps we can get a better understanding of this if we get a little bit more details about the Hyrulean Civil War, or maybe we could find some more Sheikah throughout Hyrule. And so this remake of Ocarina of Time has an opportunity to address so many different mysteries about the game. And they could really expand on things here and make it really cool. But what other mysteries in Ocarina of Time do you think perhaps this remake could address? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.